Penumbra Black Plague serves as a sequel to Penumbra Overture, a 2007 survival horror game developed by Frictional Games as the studio's first mainstream release and the first episode of a planned trilogy. Overture is an interesting beast of a game which I can relate to on many levels, with both of us being inherently flawed and somewhat misguided. I mean, that cannot stop me from loving it as a spooky adventure game set in an abandoned mining complex. I feel like Frictional was able to create an interesting and disturbing environment in the echoing darkness below us, with a strong focus on exploration and discovery. The journey through the game's world is actually one of those aspects I really adore. Even if I wasn't really invested in the story, which is, in my opinion, lacking in urgency and focus. On the other hand, the puzzle-oriented gameplay loop, which was spiced up with the occasional monster, was another strong element. One of my pet peeves was the weakness of the horror elements that started to surface as the game kept on going, with its biggest problem being the fact that after a short period of time, its monsters and scares became predictable for me personally. But because of the short runtime, it was still able to remain a potent and spooky horror game for many. I can absolutely understand this, considering that horror is one of those genres that resonates differently with everyone, since what we consider to be disturbing or terrifying might not hit someone else as effectively. But nonetheless, I wasn't as frightened as other people I knew. This could be attributed to the fact that the faulty by design combat system of the game was still OP enough to grant you a chance to rid the complex of most creatures after a bit of learning and getting used to the mechanics. It didn't really create a risk-reward situation and actually ended up being the polar opposite. It became the winning strategy of the game. The game's critical reception mostly echoed my complaints. Actually, I was echoing them because they had to hand these articles in like 13 or so years ago. You get what I mean, bucko. Frictional now had a wide array of feedback to polish and strengthen the stronger elements of Overture and flesh them out for the second episode, Black Plague. The question is, did they succeed in this regard?
There is no point.
Holy shit, they did. Penumbra Black Plague ups the ante in every possible way you would expect a horror game sequel to do so, and it does so in such a confident and ballsy way that I was just speechless over how effective this game still is. Black Plague picks up the thread of our story where Overture got whooped in the head and kidnapped, leaving it in a dark and damp hallway to fester. The game starts in a prison cell where we have been trapped by something beautiful that seems to be wreaking havoc a few rooms away. I expected the runtime to be similar to Overture in a way, so an in medias res opening is definitely a way to go. Usually, I love slow burn experiences where there is an incredibly long atmospheric build-up, but here the opposite works incredibly well. The first room in itself is extremely telling about what direction the game is going to take. After escaping from your makeshift prison cell, you'll have the opportunity to venture through the shelter, an underground research center situated below the lead mine of the previous game, established by the archaic elevated cast. Without spoiling too much, all I'm gonna say is that, after the first game, we end up finding a trace of Philip's father, Howard, who seems to be a member of a group of people trying to escape the facility, which seems to be in quite a disarray. Black Plague is basically set in the middle of an underground apocalypse, but we end up being someone who missed the bus, so to say, resulting in a wild goose chase, which requires us to follow paper trails and venture into unspeakable depths. Spooky. Early on in the game, it becomes apparent that an infection is spreading among the workers of the shelter, causing them to become extraordinarily beautiful and calm creatures with no anger issues whatsoever. The stakes, however, get a lot higher when it turns out that we've been infected with the virus as well. And since becoming an unhinged lunatic with skin crustier than burnt bread is out of the question, our only option is to find Amabel Swanson, a member of the archaic scientists who happens to be the only person with a possible cure. The situation only becomes more dire when you realize that her behavior seems to be a bit peculiar. Let's just call it Proto-Rat syndrome and move on. It's quite the setup, which I would normally leave till the end of the video, but let's try and tackle it first so parts of the gameplay make a bit more sense, right? Perfect. You're such a great listener, have I told you that before? Most of my criticism towards Penumbra Overture's story was aimed at the lack of urgency that I felt while playing it. And also the fact that I didn't really feel like I would end up benefiting from a meetup with a well-versed but unpredictable miner man whose recipe book probably has more engine oil in it than a car mechanic's outfit does at the end of the day. I mean, at least I could have talked to him about classical literature, I guess. Or gotten stabbed after hearing the most important literary question of all time. What, you egg? After Overture's focus on world building and establishing the setting, Black Plague takes a more personal direction with its story, putting you as the protagonist into the spotlight. Philip's dad, Howard, seems to be really close based on all the notes left behind, and that coupled with our little infection problem might actually open the motivation valve in your beautiful brain. The story starts building up the horror surrounding you extremely well, and in the first 10 to 20 minutes it becomes apparent that Frictional spent a lot of time developing the pacing. Black Plague has an incredible arc of build up to it. I really love the first 30 or so minutes of disorienting chaos and tension, after which a Silent Hill-esque puzzle section emerges basically from nowhere, solidifying a psychological horror undertone for the rest of the game, while also reflecting on the events that preceded our journey into the shelter. Also giving our little infection a character.
Why can't I hear their voices? Well, thanks for the help. I'm having an existential nightmare and you can't even say a word.
Clarence is arguably the most interesting part of the story, at least for a first glance. Although I kinda pigeonholed his character into a very specific category of minor characters in horror games, you know, the jokesters who have no reason to be there and keep ruining the atmosphere and tension. Shut up, you fat fuck! Clarence becomes our companion throughout our little journey into the shelter, and he always finds a way to torture us in some incredibly twisted way. His character traits consist of the unhinged lunacy of Red, coupled with a powerful will to oppose and control Philip. Philip himself doesn't have a strong character, he's just there for you to get invested in the story by providing relatable thoughts and realistic reactions to current events. His thoughts are showcased in loading screens and through observations he makes in the environment, but this doesn't give too much away about what kind of a dude he is. I mean, he likes films.
Did you realize you got an entire section in here devoted to film titles? 3,103 and a half films you've seen? You only got the first half of It's a Wonderful Life in here. Huh, how did it end? Now I'll never know.
The writing, however, is interesting, and the notes and documents found around the base tell us just enough to understand. I love the personal notes, and I love listening to the shelter's announcement because I always find the idea of reading about people who live and function in a totalitarian setting on a daily basis to be quite intriguing. Sometimes, however, the announcements go a bit too hard, I guess.
Chef Carlito is waiting for you in the mess hall with insert today's specials here. A happy worker is an efficient worker, and only efficient workers will be fed.
So what we have left are the shelter to explore, to learn about the virus and its origins, to get rid of Clarence, and to find out what happened to Phil's dad. And I'm gonna stop you right here and board this door up for you so you won't even glance at the spoilers. If you're interested, I can let you go in and take a peek at what's been going on in there. If you would like to avoid spoilers, just fast forward to the following section of the video, alright? As I said in the previous review, I don't want no death threats over spoiling a 3-hour-long game about a schizophrenic man running around an underground apocalypse, alright? You'll be warned, we're diving into the spoiler zone. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Mine is kinda because there are lots of loud kids outside who made the recording procedure a lot more difficult. Meaning that I had to basically relocate to a secluded shack and go black metal on my script. The virus is nothing new. We faced its effects in the previous game without even knowing it. The wildlife becoming more erratic and violent, workers showing symptoms similar to schizophrenia, and also the whispering. Throughout the previous installment, the whole virus was set up to be a mix of chemicals found in the caves, giving the story a more grounded and realistic feel. But Black Plague sets its foot down on my chest and starts pushing down on me while talking about supernatural mumbo-jumbo and about opening an ancient Turngate tomb buried below Greenland. The virus is actually a hive mind-controlled organism that preceded mankind, but due to the overpopulation of the latter, it tried to conceal itself deep down, right until the elevated caste tried to capitalize on its knowledge and abilities, which the Turngate used before to support the betterment and evolution of mankind. It isn't just your ordinary sci-fi horror alien race. It's a sophisticated entity that's extremely dangerous as an individual, but more of them gather, the more intelligent and sophisticated they become. Meaning that the individuals work like animalistic, zombie-like, instinct-oriented creatures that hunt anyone on sight. What's happening here is basically a self-defense situation where the Turngate tries to stop mankind from exploiting it, describing how humans work as the polar opposite of them, how we are peaceful individuals and dangerous, aggressive, animalistic creatures when in a group. That's just further reinforced by the cast's operation concerning the tomb. Not much is known about the Turngate, but it's clear that Philip's dad was able to contact the hive mind, which inadvertently led to his demise in the library of the complex where we stumble upon him. Clarence remains an important point of the story since even though he seems to be a sort of schizophrenia-induced personality, he's part of the Turngate, yet he cannot hear them as long as he's unable to assume control over Philip, which he attempts multiple times by the use of psychological trickery and hallucinations.
Part of something larger. We are nothing. We are a mistake. I need to rejoin them. Release me. Let me out. This is not right. I should be with them. I am them. There should be no I.
His plan backfires, however, when he creates an illusion which turns Amabel Swanson into an infected, forcing us to kill her, and disabling us from finding a cure and a means to get rid of him. He wants Philip to give up and hand the control over, so to say. While the execution of Amabel's murder leaves a lot to be desired, it's impactful enough to rekindle Philip's spirit in creating the cure. The instructions of which are saved on Amabel's computer, so we've got everything we need. Our job is clear at that point. Clarence attempts to sabotage this plan, showcasing fear towards his potential murder, but no matter what, it is going to happen at this point. After surviving intense manipulation and psychological opposition, Philip creates a cure, ridding himself from Clarence, whose conscience gets transported in the body of an infected, basically bringing him back to life for a few seconds before the Turngate tear him apart. Which is because he did not reach a connection to the hive mind and became an individual through all of this. This is when the Turngate hive mind attempts to communicate with Philip, teaching him about their history, their behavior and their nature as a hive mind. This happens through a series of tests which Philip has to solve in a specific way, thinking with the mind of a group-oriented and, in normal conditions, peaceful entity. These tests are not about your survival, they are about survival as a group and with the least amount of violence towards anything. Sometimes you'll have to sacrifice your individual needs or even your life to reach such goals, which goes against what makes a man, right? As we are always focused on ourselves and our own goals and achievements and our own safety as well. This is the reason why Clarence was killed in the first place. He became focused on himself and his own existence, basically going against the idea of a hive mind. Turns out Clarence was more human than we previously anticipated, huh? The tests facilitate the understanding of the Turngate because they work through story and gameplay, making us actively think about how to solve problems similarly to how they would. There is no penalty for not succeeding, which I'm fine with, considering how some of the tests are vague and might actually require you to fail them once. This is helped by the fact that the Turngate seems focused on trying to teach Philip about their ways as well. The concepts brought up in Black Plague sound really profound at the heat of the moment, but they won't go more in depth than this. Which is not really a problem in itself, since not all stories have to be incredibly insightful while offering a critique about our psychological nature and challenging the tenets of our individuality. It's just that I expected more than, look, it's a hive mind and it behaves differently than we do. Considering the topic though, I can sort of see the evolution in writing that led to some of the ideas present in Soma, where questions about human consciousness and what makes a human being are tackled head-on with bravado. The Turngate 101 becomes finalized with them asking you to make sure that their existence remains a secret, so no human meddling can ever disturb them or use their knowledge and powers. Similarly to how they instructed Howard, who ended up contacting Philip as a means to find someone who is able to destroy every document related to the research station, sealing its secrets in the process. The game, however, ends with Philip sending the email that we are all too familiar with at this point, but that's not all. Possibly due to his fear of the unknown or just wanting revenge for his father's demise, Philip goes against what the Turngate wanted from him, instructing the email's recipient to destroy them, with the coordinates of the mine included in the letter. Wow, what is going on in here? The ending hit me semi-hard when I saw it for the first time, but if I'm being honest, I'm unsure why all of this has happened. It's a big twist and a good way to finish the series up though, simply because the final few moments kinda suggest that there is no way out for Philip, who seems to be content about his situation, slowly withering away in front of the computer he used to send the letter. I would like to point out some minor inconsistencies and do some nitpicking on some story beats that I didn't really understand or consider to be thought out. First and foremost, the Annabelle Swanson situation. Why and how could a hallucination hurt us? That has to be a real Turngate then, right? I felt like that sequence was a problematic and ham-fisted way to put a twist on the whole Clarence situation. I even started playing with the thought that the dead body was a hallucination in order to make us finally lose control, but that's just a theory. The scene also hurts the horror aspect of the game, but I'm gonna talk about that in detail later. I already brought up points as to why Philip would go against the Turngate, but I guess if we take a look at what invading alien forces in films and games taught us, it's better to be sure, right? The twist works, but you'll never know why it happens. You are left to your own conclusions with it. I still consider it to be an effective one nonetheless. One of the biggest questions for me is how did Philip get infected in the first place? You could say that it was the dogs and spiders as they bit him, basically transmitting the virus, but what about the whispers in the beginning of the previous game? Philip had no encounters with the monsters yet. The same whispering came from the artifacts as well, and it's clear that the artifacts also helped the Turngate overtake. So it had to be the artifacts, right? These are just theories at this point because some story beats are incredibly vague. Feel free to tell me that I'm wrong about everything and to delete my channel and to follow it up with a ritualistic suicide that has to be uploaded to Lively. Woo! We are back now. Overall, it is clear that Frictional tried to tell an incredibly ambitious story that made me care. I got invested and felt like I need to hurry and do my best. This is not something that many stories can achieve for me, and I'm deeply satisfied, even though some story beats left me confused about the full picture, leaving me without a crystal clear resolution. Normally I wouldn't call this a problem because some stories work incredibly well, simply because there is an unexplainable mystery behind them. Look at Silent Hill for instance. But in the case of Black Plague, I feel like it's not vagueness and an intentionally muddied narrative, but oversights. Phew! The story ended up being more complex than I originally expected, and dissecting it was fun and interesting. How does the horror compare? The beginning is tense, claustrophobic, dark, and disorienting, with a focus on puzzle solving while also being a bit less friendly towards the player than Overture was. The most telling aspect being that you have no means to defend yourself, a controversial and brave design choice which basically rids most of the problems with the game's horror atmosphere. You can hide and hope for the best, and I love it. It takes away the possibility of just making your job a lot easier since you don't have a pickaxe to deep into your problem's cranium.
Hiding in the bush, putting a plasma bolt through a hostile's cranium. Makes me feel alive.
Black Plague's levels seem to be designed around the same principle as Overture's, but while the latter is constantly peppered with monsters whose patrol routes you can get adjusted to, the former uses different scripted sequences to drop some monsters on top of you, usually in small locations as well. When you enter an area, it usually doesn't have a monster strutting about, it's just you, waiting for the Turngate to slowly creep up on you and give you a little kiss. This approach in itself gives a presence to the monsters. They are spaced out quite evenly and you don't get used to them while playing, at least not as much as you could to the dogs. You see, I already told you that you're not gonna have any means to defend yourself, just your small little footsies to keep you going. I mean your fingers on the W and shift, because luckily we are well-trained gamers who are not in immediate danger. If I had to run from these things, woohoo! I would start asphyxiating as soon as one of these guys glanced at me, cracking a smile, asking for something juicy while gently brushing my face with his big fucking crowbar. The monsters look crusty as hell. Their design is hideous and disgusting, with their skin peeling off and their umbilical cords that go straight back. At first I was confused because I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's a penis in my video game.
What is that?
It's Ron's dick. Minus Ron.
The thing I hate about them the most is when they are given a flashlight. No, get the penis bit out of your head. I meant the torch. I mean, yeah, I don't feel comfortable in the dark anyways, you might as well just make it worse for me. It has something primal and terrifying about being hunted by malformed flashlight-wielding hunters who are looking for me in the dark. It's similar to what they tried to accomplish with the dogs in the previous one, but now you are actual prey and you're not up against wildlife, you're up against hunters who lost most of their human qualities but still retain a partial self-awareness as they mutter to themselves and react to noise asking, "What was that?" Like, there's still a human inside somewhere whose awareness surfaces, but everything remains deeply buried under a homebrew Darth Zion cosplay that melted away in a car that you left out in the sun. Even though I like their design, I feel like they aren't really that terrifying in themselves, which is due to how low-res they feel sometimes. To counter that, the panic mechanic was brought back, baby, and it reinforces the horror elements even more, thanks to the lack of weapons. Looking at the monsters is even more dangerous now, since giving your position away has more severe repercussions than the fact that you have to whoopity-whoop. Considering the mechanical changes, an even bigger emphasis has been put on stealth. It was necessary in the first game as well, but it wasn't facilitated by the mechanics and the combat system. But in a setting where everything is a threat, it works almost flawlessly. You can hide in the dark and crouch walk away if they end up close to you. That's usually the best method to go for, since walking and running around will get them attracted to you. They run at a pace similar to yours, and closing doors in their faces or chucking shit at them is the only way to save yourself. You can also no-scope one of the doors that works as a loading screen, because these guys are dummies and they don't have a mouse. You can actually kill them, but it's a real hassle and I'm not sure if it's doable on normal or hard. I'm not gonna ruin the mood by showing it to you. Come on, I want you to be spooked, and this is probably my only real problem with the game when it comes to the mechanics. I just don't understand why a mechanic like this was implemented in the first place. I mean, you basically took away everything that can kill the monsters, but ended up leaving such a cheeky and dumb way to kill them. It just makes them look a lot worse than the zombie dogs. Even if it's like a reward for like perseverance. Also, the weakest part of the game is when it forces you to kill one of these guys in a scripted sequence by dropping a big ass box on its head. Why? You basically created monsters that already make my skin crawl whenever I think about them, see them. Heck, I get reminded of them when I see paint peeling off a wall. I just feel like there are still some instances where Frictional was unsure about how much it will affect the atmosphere if they give you a chance to combat a monster you couldn't normally. When it comes to enemies being in their element though, there are less scripted chase sequences in the game, and they are a lot shorter and meaner, with these beautiful guys bursting out of different rooms unexpectedly. Our Infection also spices things up by borrowing some cheeky little tricks from the psychological horror department, which there aren't many of in the game unfortunately. There is one I can remember where it was actually utilized in a chase, but all I'm gonna say is that our minds can't always be trusted. There is one scare in the game that's so bad that I was legitimately sad that it got me while playing. Jump scares are still not common, with this being one of the few ones that show up throughout the game. I could count them on one hand. And they aren't really cheap, except this guy, he's just goofy. Frictional even toyed around with the idea of monsters you can't see. There is quite a great build-up in the kennels about something in the walls that you have to evade by using environmental objects and light. It is effective without showing anything. Listen to it sing. A part of me would say that I really miss the tools from the previous game because they spiced chases up a lot with all the different obstacles you could bring down or use against your pursuers. But I feel like their absence doesn't make encounters less frightening. This is due to the fact that now you are required to pay even more attention to your surroundings at that particular moment, since Unless you count running, there isn't an obvious universal answer like, okay, I'm gonna have to mine this bad boy until I can crawl through. Just like in the previous game, noise also plays an important role and can be used to sneak past enemies. I forgot to mention this before, but it wasn't really something that I had to rely on in Overture, since I always had my trusty broom. The inventory system remains the exact same grid-style layout with optional interaction slots, which are used by the number keys. If you would like to put on your gas mask, you just place it in one of those number slots and press that particular button. Your batteries also show up in there as well, granting you an opportunity to manage how charged your flashlight is throughout your journey. The glow stick makes a return as well with the same functionality. You can use it whenever to illuminate small areas without any restrictions. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that we're in the sad boy zone. I forgot to mention in the previous review that you can also find flares. The thing about flares is that you can throw them around, but other than that they serve the same purpose as the glow stick and have the same functionality as the glow stick, highlighting a small area surrounding them. Therefore the glow stick and the flashlight makes them straight up useless. The inventory still plays a pivotal role in combining and storing your items, since puzzle solving remains an integral part of the gameplay. This aspect of the game plays out similarly to the previous installment. One central puzzle, which can be solved through multiple small puzzles, which will require you to find tools by exploring the game's varied locations. Standard deal, and it's easy to figure out what you'll need next, even without the constantly updating to-do list and notebook, with the latter serving as a means to gather all the notes you found scattered around the base. These are mostly story related, however sometimes they contain the solution to certain puzzles. The game also introduced computers which you can use to open certain doors and find notes. They basically serve as an extra layer of interactivity and another way for the developers to chuck some story beats and notes in front of you. The puzzles became less obvious in this one as well, especially in the more outlandish Silent Hill section, but even the grounded and realistic puzzles can be head-scratching ones sometimes. I'm a weird man, so my favorite is the one where I have to set up a server PC by installing drivers. I'm not even joking. But that whole sequence is actually preceded by a good chase though, that makes it even better. If you play the game, you'll notice a few laser traps, which detonate as soon as you touch the beams. You can disable these, but I never had the patience for them, so I just used the environment to get over these traps. I feel like that one puzzle type is the only bad one in the game. There ain't no fillers and some of them are actually quite clever. I'm happy because I can finally feel clever. I'm not stupid. Nah, probably am. I have a feeling that the laser traps being avoidable by design is the devs' way of acknowledging how those puzzles feel really dull to solve, but that's just my take anyways. The interaction mechanics feel a bit more responsive in this one when it comes to turning valves and flipping switches. You can even rotate the items in your hand, which is a nice touch. I can finally make every room feel a lot like mine. Hey there buddy, you look a bit weathered. Are you alright? I have to say that working here would be stressful, so you should be extremely proud of yourself. If I had to describe the environment you guys work in, it's probably like, it's too damn filthy. It's really filthy, actually. I mean, not as filthy as your favorite Slam releases, but you get the idea. You're basically experiencing an ongoing apocalypse underground. Location variety has become a lot better since the first game, with every room serving a vastly different purpose. Server room, medical bay, library, kennels, living quarters, sewers, and silent Greenland mines. The environments still maintain the grounded and realistic look and feel that we all loved in the previous one, but the more psychological nature of the story introduces more surrealistic landscapes as well. There isn't too many of these, and that's why they work really well as off-putting pieces of level design. The visual department also received a substantial overhaul. Some parts of the texture work remain low-res, but those are reused assets from the previous game. Locales look really crisp and beautiful, especially in the beginning where the first well-lit environments are showcased. The lighting feels a lot more refined and realistic. There were just cases where I stood in a room gazing at how good the environment looks as the light keeps on flickering on and off. The ambient soundscapes feel a lot thicker and more terrifying than Overture's less dense and more minimalistic tracks. Even the chase music has been improved. It's not as heavy on percussion, but the loudness and intensity has been increased nonetheless. There is still quite a bit of contrast between the more somber piano-based tracks and the hellish ambient tracks. While I'm playing the game, I just feel like I'm constantly followed by a noise band. Even right now. Am I going fucking insane, my man? Wait, where are you? Overall, I have to say that While it was confusing in the story department, Black Plague serves as a substantial upgrade to the formula that debuted in Penumbra Overture. The devs cemented the first episode's horror foundation with a noticeable increase in graphical fidelity and writing. The music still spooks me, and I'm gonna plug the composer's Bandcamp once again, just for the fuck of it. After Black Plague, there was supposed to be a third episode that was never completed, which can probably be attributed to the global economic crisis at the time. That's just my take anyway, yet again. With all that behind us though, Frictional didn't give up on making a final Penumbra game. In 2009, they released Penumbra Requiem as an expansion to Black Plague, after which I was incredibly excited to play this new addition to the series. If you're still here with me, you're probably already asking how was my experience with the final installment. Well, Penumbra Requiem broke my heart in so many places that even the glue that was holding it together had to be glued together. I didn't mean this as a sort of mean jab at Frictional Games, because I love their work and creative output, and I was incredibly excited after I finished Black Plague, simply because I was eagerly anticipating what Requiem is going to add to the story. Well, the story continues while Philip pressed enter in the last game. After the ending, when he sends the email, one of the infected whacks him over the head with something, upon which he loses consciousness and gets transported into a weird hallucinatory state, teleporting your boy into some truly dreamy locations and real-life inspired interiors. Some of these resemble the Turngate tomb, which was referenced in Black Plague many times, and also the shelter. There are also hellish industrial-looking environments in the middle of nowhere, giving a sort of nightmarish and creepy Silent Hill-esque quality to some of the environments. So what we have here is a 3-hour-long dream sequence where we solve puzzles and jump between levels using portals as random characters from the previous games dump exposition-sounding monologues on us.
Most people unquestioningly pursue what society tells them to pursue. A mindless herd. But then there are those that think for themselves. Only these stubbornly logical minds could join the elevated caste. I questioned everything I thought I knew and felt prepared. But what use is that now, in a place that defies all logic?
The story and progression of events are kinda muddy, with lots of returning characters talking about the Turngate or themselves. When Red came back though, the game lost me pretty much. This is mostly due to how the exposition and story the characters dump on you have no cohesion to them whatsoever. I feel like I receive information pieces that should be interconnected, forming a narrative throughout the whole experience, but that never ends up being the case. As I said beforehand, it's just a dream, a muddied collection of thoughts and visions that don't necessarily make any sense. Therefore, the story remains a mishmash of Philip's thoughts as he is slowly withering away in the complex. This is juxtaposed by the levels, which also provide me with a similar feeling of venturing through vague memories and preconceptions about what certain locations should look like. In the case of a story that was always upfront and specific about most of its events, I think you can understand how all of this can end up feeling a bit half-baked. My biggest gripe with the game is that I feel like it's just floating alongside the previous entries, but in a disconnected way. There isn't a purpose to the plot, which was surprising and disappointing after Overture and Black Plague. It's really clear that they tried to tack something on so it won't end up being just a Penumbra-themed puzzle game, which the game ended up being, unfortunately. The story adds nothing to the mystique or the lore, serving as a collection of themes and characters for you to recognize, with an ending that has no purpose either, considering how all of this is just a dream. Skip to this part if you wouldn't want to see the ending. If that discourages you from continuing, just play the darn games, please. They're good. So as you're progressing towards the end, interiors start to look oddly familiar as you finally enter the final chamber of the game, which is the incinerator of the first episode. But instead of Red, it's your turn to climb inside and turn yourself into ash. Or you could just leave the facility on the boat you came with, the first ending being followed up by Philip dying on the floor in front of the computer he sent the email from. So the endings could be reflections on his regrets and mistakes? Why didn't he die instead of Red so he could have just stopped all of this from happening? Even if he just left, all of this wouldn't have happened. Hey there, spoiler dodgers. I don't think any of you is shady, but you're back again. And to conclude the story segment, I would just like to mention that I feel like nothing was added and nothing of substance was told in this one when it comes to an actual story. It's basically just an amalgamation of Penumbra themes and set pieces, and that's what bothers me the most. But what about the gameplay? Requiem goes against the conventions of the series by focusing mainly on the puzzle solving, leaving its horror elements behind. Some of its environments, though, are still able to capture a dark and foreboding atmosphere while I'm running, jumping, and thinking in the middle of it all. The levels don't really have a flow to them, with the only common element of them being the portals that you travel through at the end of each stage. Your goal, therefore, is to escape into other rooms by collecting orb-shaped keys that open these aforementioned portals. This is basically the entire gameplay loop spiced up with puzzle after puzzle. Some of these actually made me scratch my head really hard, but most of them can be solved rather easily. However, the game's many problems are rooted in the way these puzzles were executed. Some of them are straight up fillers which are just there to slow your progress. Yes, I'm looking at you, sewer level. Backtracking becomes a lot more important than it is in the previous games, which also adds a layer of monotony. I'm not against the concept itself, but Requiem is just one of those games where I didn't have a good time going through the same locations based on whether or not I missed something. Also, I feel like the complete lack of any danger reduces the stakes and urgency behind the puzzles. In the other games, there was always a factor that kept on bugging me while puzzle solving. Maybe I was just thinking about how to cross the monsters while exploring, or I was just being tense over venturing into unknown locations. While the game has interesting looking and dreamlike environments, they feel soulless and safe. I understand that we are talking about a puzzle game, but if your previous installments have a horror foundation which served as a facilitating factor to your puzzle-oriented gameplay loop by basically utilizing the puzzles as a sort of cooldown between scares, you can't just ditch it. The genius of Penumbra's puzzles, in my opinion, isn't only the fact that they were placed between tense situations to sort of pull your shit together like in Amnesia, they also served as an amplification of the horror aspects, like in Black Plague where you were chased through the chemical labs while puzzle solving your way out of them basically. The game placed a creeping threat on you while you had to figure out how to escape. Requiem's puzzles are just there. They are competent puzzles for the most part, and some of them are actually really clever, but they end up feeling dull because they are placed in a horror-themed environment where you don't receive horror stimuli, if you know what I mean. Frictional plays around with interesting new mechanics like anti-gravity pads, teleports, and these are spaced out quite evenly. The game has a short runtime, and almost every level has an interesting new trick up its sleeve to compensate for that. Some mechanics only appear once, like the controllable anti-gravity thingies I mentioned earlier. When I play the other games, I always have a grasp on my environment and what I need to do to progress through it. I feel like some puzzles in this one are not really telegraphed all that well. I have a specific one in mind which kinda eluded me for a bit at the end of the game, and also the final puzzle which probably took me 20 minutes to figure out because I didn't notice a crucial item that was required for it to work. I mistook it for something else. I might be a dummy, but this is just the way I am, bucko. I also feel like the dullness also comes from the audiovisual department, which is lacking compared to the previous titles. Mikko Tarmia's incredible ambient work is still there, but the visual department feels incredibly weak. The strongest visual aspect of Penumbra games was always the lighting, which turned even the most unimaginative and plain-looking environments into something decrepit but still beautiful. Requiem brought the same kind of dissatisfaction which I experienced with Fear Perseus Mandate. The locations just lost a lot of character due to the lack of intricate lighting, which worked wonderfully in the previous ones, I might add. Also, the game hitches and stutters like I do after my fourth coffee at 4 AM as I'm profusely crying above the academic paper that's due that day. I don't understand why, because the other games seemed a lot more taxing and ran without a problem. Needless to say, I'm sporting hardware that shouldn't have a problem with an indie game from 2009. I didn't get into the technicalities beforehand because I felt like it wasn't necessary, but this game ended up behaving rather weirdly. It might not be visible on my footage, but at every loading screen, it started behaving like it was about to crash to the desktop, but then out of nowhere it started working as intended. And that's when I realized that I actually had a problem running Frictional games, in a way. After you change the resolution to like 1080p, there can be instances when only just a small portion of the screen ends up on your display, like this. To fix this, just go for your Penumbra EXEs and change the DPI settings under the compatibility tab and shit's gonna be fine. Unfortunately, Requiem was a not so enjoyable experience for me, and it actually stands as the weakest entry in the Frictional games catalog in my book. I have to say that I still find parts of its puzzle design to be endearing and interesting, but I just feel like this game was unnecessary. Every amazing quality of the previous games was absent in this one, and it actually feels like it was made by a different studio. In my opinion, there was no need for this one. The story was closed by Black Plague. Heck, Requiem's intro should have been added to Black Plague's ending to cement what happened exactly. I'm still happy that I revisited it along with Black Plague though. These games are important to me since they played a pivotal role in introducing me to the horror genre and all the classics. Heck, it made me play some point-and-click adventure games as well. I was harsh towards Requiem, and some of you might actually end up saying that I was too critical about Black Plague as well. But don't get me wrong, that won't stop me from loving these games. I mean, I don't love Requiem, but you get what I mean. I hold them to a high regard, next to my big boy Amnesia. Let's not forget that without these bad boys, Amnesia wouldn't have happened. Penumbra also spawned some fan games in the form of Amnesia Total conversions, with the most well-known being Penumbra Necrolog and its sequel, Twilight of the Archaic. I'm gonna review them once in the future, I assure you, because I remember them being great entries and polished ones actually, but I feel like I spent way too much time on these games for some reason. I feel a bit tired of horror games right now, so we are going to venture into space for the next one. I hope I'll see you there, but now if you excuse me, I have a taxi to catch. Thank you for watching.